At a lavish party, a rich woman slapped her black housekeeper for touching her baby. Guests gasped. But moments later, her husband stepped in and revealed a secret so explosive the entire room fell dead silent. And the woman dropped to her knees in tears. The Preston estate was a picture of perfection. Gleaming marble floors, manicured gardens, waiters in black vests gliding through white canopies under the afternoon sun. It was their daughter's first birthday, and the whole world had seemingly been invited to witness the grand affair. Children played near the fountains, laughter rang out like music boxes, photographers snapped candids of expensive shoes and designer dresses. Crystal glasses clinked with imported champagne. Everything sparkled, including the baby, little Ivy, dressed in a cloud of white lace, her soft curls tied with a silk bow. But amid the luxury, inside the house, behind the kitchen wall, stood Maria. She was not part of the celebration, not truly. Maria, the black housekeeper in a plain blue dress, stood silently slicing fruit trays in the kitchen. Her dark hands worked swiftly and gently, the way they had for years. No one noticed her. They never did. And yet, for the last 11 months, it was Maria who had rocked Ivy to sleep during teething nights. Maria who had held her when she had her first fever. Maria who whispered lullabies in a language the baby didn't understand, but always calmed her soul. Today, Maria had tried to stay out of sight. She knew better than to be seen around Celeste's friends, the kind of women who complimented their jewelry more than their children. But Ivy had been screaming for hours. The new nanny couldn't calm her. None of the guests dared go near her. From the hallway, Maria heard the baby's shrill cries, desperate, gasping, heartbroken. That sound didn't just echo in her ears, it pierced her. She stepped forward. Inside the nursery, Ivy sat on the floor, face red and soaked in tears. The nanny stood helpless, arms stiff. Celeste wasn't around. No one could soothe the child. Maria didn't ask permission. She knelt beside Ivy, gently lifted her into her arms and began humming, a soft, swaying rhythm from her childhood. Ivy gasped between sobs, then quieted. The little girl rested her head on Maria's chest like it was the only place she felt safe. "Shh, sweetheart," Maria whispered. "I've got you, my baby." Then came the footsteps. Sharp, cold, fast. Celeste Preston stood at the doorway, and her face twisted into something monstrous. In one swift motion, crack! A loud slap echoed through the nursery as Celeste's hand met Maria's cheek. Gasps erupted from behind her. Guests had followed to see what the noise was. "How dare you touch my daughter!" Celeste screamed, eyes wild with rage. "You are nothing but the help!" Maria froze. Her body trembled. Her arms still held Ivy protectively, though the shock from the slap made her vision blur. She didn't move. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart cracked, not from pain, but for what Ivy might believe now. Ivy whimpered, confused, and clung tighter to Maria. Celeste snatched the baby away with force, causing the child to burst into loud sobs once more. "I said don't touch her," Celeste snarled. Around them no one spoke. Not the nanny, not the guests. No one came to Maria's defense. They all just stared, stunned, embarrassed, complicit. Maria slowly reached up and touched her cheek. It stung, but it wasn't the slap that broke her. It was the look in Celeste's eyes. A look that didn't just say you don't belong. It said, you are invisible. Maria backed away, tears welling but refusing to fall. She walked out of the room, head bowed, dignity unraveling with every step. In the kitchen, she stood silently, facing the sink, holding onto the counter as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. The buzzing noise of the party outside felt miles away now. That's when David walked in. He had just arrived from a business meeting and was told there had been an incident, but he hadn't expected this. He saw Maria standing there, the side of her face flushed red, her hand shaking as she rinsed dishes that weren't even dirty, her back straight, but her soul visibly crumbling. "Maria?" he said softly. She didn't turn. "Did she hit you?" Still no answer. "Maria, please!" After a long pause, she spoke. Quiet, controlled. "She slapped me because I held Ivy when she cried. That's all I did. I was trying to help." David stepped closer, grief in his eyes. "She doesn't know." Maria finally turned. Her eyes were wet, but proud. "No, she doesn't. And she doesn't care to. I'm just a housekeeper to her. But to Ivy," her voice cracked. "To Ivy, I'm more than that." David's expression hardened with guilt and resolve. "She deserves to know, Maria. Everyone does. What happened today, it can't be buried anymore." Maria looked at him for a long moment. "You sure you're ready for what happens after?" David's answer was immediate. "I wasn't. Until now." He turned and left the room. He was no longer just walking back into a party. He was walking toward a storm he helped create and now had to finally face.
David Preston didn't stop to sip champagne. He didn't smile politely at guests. He moved like a man haunted. His eyes fixed on the white canopy where his wife now sat, cradling their still-crying baby, surrounded by a sea of murmuring guests and plastic smiles. He could still see the red imprint on Maria's cheek burned into his memory. His stomach turned. Celeste looked up as he approached, offering a quick, strained smile. "Darling, you made it. Where have you been?" He didn't answer. She frowned. "What's wrong?" "I need to speak to you, now." He didn't ask, he commanded. The music kept playing. Laughter still echoed. But a few guests stopped, sensing the shift in energy, the crackling tension in the air. Celeste looked around awkwardly and stood, handing Ivy back to the nanny. "Can it wait? Not in front of—" "No, it can't." He led her inside the house, through the marble hallway, past family portraits and polished furniture. Into the study, he shut the door behind them. Celeste folded her arms. "What is this about?" "You hit her." "Excuse me?" "Maria, you hit Maria in front of guests, in front of our daughter." Celeste's eyes flared. "I did what any mother would do. She had no right to touch Ivy. She's the help, David. Do you know how that looks?" He stepped closer. "You think what it looked like is what matters?" "She overstepped. She has boundaries." "No," he said sharply, "you crossed the line. Maria didn't just touch our daughter, she's raised her. She soothed her through fevers, rocked her to sleep, loved her when no one else was there. You just never noticed because you were too busy hosting brunches and posting Ivy's outfits on Instagram." Celeste's mouth dropped. "How dare you speak to me like—" "Do you want to talk about daring?" David's voice lowered to a trembling whisper. "Years ago, before you and I were married, I was in a different place. I had just come out of my father's shadow, trying to find my way. I met someone, a woman. We were both young. She was kind, strong, and had the gentlest spirit I'd ever seen. Her name was Maria." Celeste stepped back. "No," she whispered. David nodded, his voice thick. "Yes, she was my first love. But I was a coward. My family wouldn't have approved. She was a black woman from the wrong side of the city, and I was the heir to the Preston fortune. I let fear drive me away. I left her." Celeste stared at him in disbelief. "And then?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "I didn't see her again for years, not until we hired her as a housekeeper. She didn't say anything. She never brought up the past, never asked me for anything. She was just there, quietly doing her job. But she wasn't just any employee. She was the mother of my child. The silence that followed was louder than a scream. "What?" Celeste whispered, her voice shaking. "Ivy," David choked. "Ivy isn't biologically yours. You had so many complications with pregnancy. The doctors said it wasn't possible. We adopted, remember? But what I didn't tell you, what I buried deep, is that Ivy is my biological daughter, and Maria is her real mother." Celeste's hands covered her mouth. She staggered back against the desk. No, that's not possible. I'm her mother. You've raised her, you've given her a home, but the woman you just humiliated in front of strangers, she carried Ivy, she brought her into this world, and when you couldn't bond with her in those early months, it was Maria who fed her, held her, loved her when no one else was there. You just never noticed because you were too busy hosting brunches and posting Ivy's outfits on Instagram. Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was a coward, because I didn't want to ruin our marriage, because I thought we could all live in denial and pretend Ivy was just ours. But when I saw you slap Maria, I realized I can't pretend anymore." Celeste turned away, clutching her temples, tears falling freely now. "I loved Ivy. I still do. She's my daughter." "And she always will be," David said softly. "But so is Maria. She's part of Ivy's life, whether you like it or not." Outside the study, the party continued, oblivious to the emotional earthquake rumbling behind closed doors. Inside, Celeste collapsed into a chair, her entire body trembling. "She's her real mother? The woman I just slapped?" David nodded. "And I screamed at her like she was nothing?" "You didn't just slap a housekeeper. You slapped the woman who gave you the child you call your daughter." For the first time in years, Celeste felt her world unravel, not because of scandal or shame, but because her heart realized something it had never allowed before. She had hated the woman who had given her the very thing she loved most.
The silence inside the study was suffocating. Celeste sat in the corner chair like a statue. Her hands shook. Her lipstick was smudged. Her eyes, once cold and commanding, now shimmered with tears she hadn't let fall in years. Across from her, David stood motionless, his confession still lingering in the air like gunpowder. The woman she had slapped, the one she'd treated like a ghost for months, was the biological mother of her daughter. The slap hadn't just been violent, it had been blasphemy. I need to fix this," Celeste muttered, standing unsteadily. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." David didn't speak. He simply opened the door for her, letting her decide what came next. Outside, the party buzzed on, completely unaware of the truth that was about to detonate at its center. The guests sipped wine and discussed hedge funds. A string quartet played something light and meaningless. Ivy sat in a stroller beside the cake table, restless and fussy again without Maria's presence. The photographer was setting up for the family photo shoot. Celeste stepped into the courtyard with a hollow look in her eyes. Some of the guests glanced at her, noticing her pale face and trembling lips. David followed behind, silent, heavy with consequence. Then, she saw her. Maria stood near the back of the garden, under the shadow of a tree, holding a tray of untouched cupcakes. Her cheek was still red from the slap. Her hands were steady, but her eyes looked lost, somewhere far away from all this glitter and noise. Celeste's heels clicked across the flagstones like gunshots, and then she did something no one expected. She fell to her knees. Right there,
In the middle of the party, in front of every wealthy guest, every gossip-hungry neighbor, every judgmental socialite, Celeste dropped to the ground at Maria's feet. Gasps erupted. Everyone turned. The music faltered. Conversations froze. Even Ivy's cries stopped for a second. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know who you were." Maria looked down, shocked, lips slightly parted. "What are you doing?" I thought you were just the help," Celeste said, her voice cracking. "But you're her mother, and I slapped you. I looked at you like you were nothing." She bowed her head lower. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to hear me say it. I'm sorry." The entire garden was still. Not a breath moved. Maria blinked. She had never seen this woman, this proud, commanding woman, reduced to such humility. Her heart thundered. Her body remained still. Then Ivy began to cry again. Celeste looked over, helpless. Her hands trembled. Maria stepped forward, slowly, gently, and moved toward the stroller. As she reached out, Ivy's tiny arms shot up, grasping for her without hesitation. She scooped the baby into her arms, and, once again, like before, the cries melted into soft hiccups. Ivy rested her head against her chest, safe, calm, home. The guests watched with wide eyes, none daring to interrupt. One woman whispered to another, "What is happening?" Another murmured, "Why did she call her her mother?" Then David stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I think everyone deserves the truth," he said firmly. "You've all witnessed something today that's deeper than gossip or scandal. This is about honesty and family." He turned to the crowd. "Ivy is my daughter, biologically, but she's also Maria's daughter. Before Celeste and I married, Maria and we were in love. Life, fear, and the pressure of this world pulled us apart. When I found out she was pregnant, I wanted to help. I wanted to raise Ivy in a stable home. Celeste and I adopted her, legally, with Maria's consent." Gasps rippled across the crowd again. But what we didn't do was tell the truth. We didn't give Maria the respect or credit she deserved. She didn't demand anything. She just stayed close to Ivy, doing what she always did, loving her. David's voice cracked. And today, that silence became cruelty. A cruelty we can't undo. Some of the guests were crying. Others stood frozen in discomfort. One of Celeste's wealthy friends murmured, "I can't believe she hit that." Another said, "I always wondered why the baby calmed with the maid and not the nanny." Celeste finally rose from the ground, her knees dusty, her dignity cracked but not shattered. She looked at Maria again, not with disdain, but something closer to reverence, something new. Will you sit with me?" she asked softly. Maria hesitated, her arms wrapped protectively around Ivy. She looked at David, then at Celeste. "I don't want your pity," she said firmly. Celeste nodded. "This isn't pity. It's surrender. I know I don't deserve a seat next to you, but maybe our daughter does." Maria's eyes welled, but she held her ground. Then slowly, she walked with Ivy back to the cake table. Celeste followed beside her, David behind them. And for the first time since the party began, the little girl smiled.
The sun had started to dip beneath the tall hedges of the Preston estate, casting long, golden shadows across the garden.
The string quartet had stopped playing. The laughter had faded. The air no longer buzzed with champagne-fueled conversation. Instead, the guests stood in stunned silence, watching the most unexpected scene unfold. At the head of the long white banquet table, once reserved only for family, sat Maria. Still in her simple blue dress, her hair tied back in a neat bun, her hands gently stroking Ivy's tiny curls. Celeste sat beside her, still rigid in posture, but somehow softer now, quieter. The high walls around her spirit had cracked, and through the gaps, something human flickered. David stood behind them both, not as the head of the house, but as a man finally choosing truth over pride. One of the older guests whispered to her husband, "This is not the kind of scandal you can cover up." Her husband replied, "No, but maybe it's the kind that can change people." The photographer who had been hired to take happy birthday shots now stood frozen, unsure if he should keep clicking. But then he saw Ivy giggle in Maria's lap, her chubby fingers tugging at her mother's necklace, and he instinctively lifted the camera. Click. The moment was real. The next morning, that photo would quietly replace the former family portrait hanging above the fireplace. No press release, no announcement, just a change. 3 days later, Maria stood by the garden, watching Ivy play in the grass with her doll. The child squealed with joy, dirt on her dress, sunlight in her hair. Celeste approached slowly, holding 2 cups of tea. "I added honey," she said. Maria turned to look at her, then gently took the cup. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a long time. It was the first time they had been alone since the party. "I can't sleep," Celeste said finally. Maria sipped her tea. "I replay it in my head, the slap, the look in your eyes. I've said sorry 100 times, but it never feels like enough." Maria's voice was calm. "Because it isn't." Celeste looked down, ashamed. "But," Maria continued, "you stayed. Most people in your world would have buried it, pushed it away, let someone else take the fall. But you came forward. You didn't run." "I almost did," Celeste admitted. "I packed a bag that night. I thought David would hate me. I thought Ivy would forget me. I thought you'd—" Maria didn't respond right away. She watched Ivy chase a butterfly across the grass. "I could never take her from you," she finally said. "She's not just yours. She's not just mine. She's ours. Not because of paperwork or blood, but because of love." Celeste's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve that grace." "None of us do," Maria said, setting her tea down. "But sometimes life hands us the chance to grow into it." Celeste looked at her. "Would you teach me?" Maria raised her eyebrow. "How to be a mother who loves like you do." Maria smiled, softly, with pain and pride entwined. "It starts with listening and remembering she's not something you own. She's someone you're entrusted to raise." They sat together on the garden bench, side by side, not as enemies, not as employer and employee, but as 2 mothers, 2 women, both changed forever by 1 child. 6 months later, the Preston Foundation for Maternal Dignity launched with little fanfare but deep purpose. It provided resources, housing, and legal aid to single mothers who had been silenced or discarded by those in power. Maria was appointed as director. Celeste sat beside her at every meeting, letting her lead, learning how to support instead of control. David stepped down from the board of the family company, choosing instead to focus on fatherhood and advocacy. He no longer wore masks. His choices were finally his own. And Ivy? She grew up with 3 people who loved her beyond words. A father who chose truth over legacy, a mother who healed through humility, and a birth mother who loved her fiercely from the beginning. Moral of the story: status does not define worth. Skin color does not define motherhood. And silence, when partnered with truth, can become the loudest voice of all. We often think strength is found in pride, but the strongest people are the ones brave enough to fall to their knees and say, "I was wrong." And the strongest love is the one that shares, forgives, and grows no matter where it began.